Welcome to QueerPop interview. This is Nathan Fréchette, and I'm here with my guest.
Cameron Combs. So I live in Olympia, Washington, out on the West Coast. We are digging out from our big snowstorm. I am a writer and a parent. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a trans, masculine, genderqueer identified person. Among other things, I am the board president of a nonprofit that supports LGBTQA plus youth in schools. It's called Pizza Clutch, and it's centered here in Olympia, Washington.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to give just a little background for myself as well. I am a trans man. I identify as gender fluid, and I'm married to a transgender woman. And I'm an author, publisher, online person, I guess. So recently, we've been made aware of a fantastic anthology for trans kids that's right now on Kickstarter. And unfortunately, this anthology has come under some fire from assigned female at birth, non-binary, and trans masculine folk. So Cam and I wanted to... Is it okay if I call you Cam?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Cam and I decided to get together and respond to some of these comments that we've been hearing passed around by many people, and we just wanted to address them.
Yeah, I think both of us have been supportive of the project, so this is another way for us to be supportive of the project.
Absolutely. I just want to state for the record that Amy Hart and Heartspark Press have no idea we're doing this right now.
That's right.
We did not consult them. We decided to do this, just the two of us, because we were flabbergasted by the response.
Yeah, we were looking for ways to use our trans-masculine voices, and privilege to help uplift this group of very scrappy creators.
Absolutely.
So we admire. Yeah.
And being, trans masculine folk ourselves, we kind of feel that it's our place to talk about this backlash.
Mm-hmm.
Just to let you know, this is an anthology being produced by Heartspark Press, which is a collective of... Actually, I have their website right here. So Heartspark Press is, in their definition, it is literature by and for transgender women. And if you go to their Who We Are page, and I know I'm reading a lot, but it's going to become relevant. Heartspark Press is a volunteer-led, nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting, developing, and amplifying the creative voices of transgender girls, transgender women, and coercively assigned male at birth, non-binary people everywhere. So this is who they are, and they've already released quite a few, a couple of works before, an anthology, Resilience, which came out, I think, last year. So basically, they're launching this, it's called 99% Chance of Magic. I don't know if you wanted to maybe tell us about it.
I know one of the organizers. I know Amy Hart, who's the executive director, and we know I know her well. She's family. So pretty much anything she says is going to be good. I'm ready to support. It's an anthology of stories for children, and especially we could say that it's especially for trans children. We could, but I think really all children should read stories about folks who are like them and also not like them.
Absolutely.
I think it's a great idea, and it's the collection of people and the talent, the artwork. They've been posting some of the artwork that goes along with stories, and it's amazing. And these are all artists who are CAMAB, coercively assigned male at birth folks, and I think it's a great project. It's great to see their creative work coming together, and to know that There's going to be some kids reading these stories who are going to relate to it, see themselves in it, and folks that won't, but will learn about other people's experiences.
Absolutely, and I'm going to include links to all of this in the doobly-doo.
Yeah.
Some of the comments that they have been fielding is that they have not been inclusive because their anthology is by specifically transgender women, girls, and coercively assigned male at birth non-binary people. So the call for submissions was not open to assign female at birth non-binary people as well as trans masculine folk. And they've been accused of being not inclusive because of that. So I'd like to address this in maybe a few steps, if I might.
Okay.
So I think, depending on who's watching us, they may have different understanding of what privilege and marginalized mean. So let's start by defining these terms, maybe.
Sure. Sounds good to me. So we say things like assigned at birth, right? Because everyone who's born, well, maybe not everyone, because we've got some folks who aren't doing it now, but most everyone who's born and alive on this planet was assigned a gender at birth by someone other than themselves, right? So we could say that was non-consensually assigned to us, which I think is where the coercive comes from.
Yes.
Forced into a box that we did not choose. And some people end up feeling fine about that box, and we call them cisgender. And a number of us find those boxes to be not well-fitting for us, not well-suited. And there are a variety of terms we use, right? So I think earlier it was assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth, and right. I think the coercively has come in to really, really punch home that this was a non-consensual assignment. Mm-hmm. And there are folks who are non-binary, so they don't ascribe to either male or female, or maybe both, And there are folks who are binary, even in the trans community, right, who relate to being male or relate to being female. What other terms do we want to talk about?
I'd like to talk about, the definition of what is a marginalized group and what is privilege.
What is privilege? What is this advantage that we call privilege? What's marginalization or oppression? What are these groups? And then intersectionality, if you want to jump in.
Yes. So I'll start with privilege, because that's, I think, to me, is the easiest to understand. So privilege is an unearned advantage that you have towards other people in certain situations. For example, I'm at work. People tend to listen to me more because they read me as male.
Mm-hmm. I have that situation as well.
Yeah.
Now,
a marginalized group is a group of people who are usually left out of certain situations and spaces. This is true for women, who are often left out of all sorts of spaces, like the workplace, certain jobs.
Decision making.
Exactly. This is true for people of color. This is true for transgender people. So there are a whole lot of different identities, which means you could be marginalized multiple times in different circles and spaces. Mm-hmm. And this is where intersectionality comes in. So intersectionality is when you have multiple identities which intersect with each other and sort of maybe add to the layers of marginalization. For example, transgender women of color, specifically black transgender women, black and indigenous transgender women, have these two identities: the identity of being transgender, of being a woman, and of being a black or indigenous person of color. These are three separate marginalized identities which interact here in many situations.
Yeah, I think of intersectionality because there's also intersectionality of privilege,
yes.
Right? There's the mirror image. But an intersectionality of oppression, I think of it as a piling on of ways that people can be victimized.
Absolutely.
And I think it's good. I think it's important to note for folks who are maybe not familiar with thinking about privilege and advantage, because privilege, I think they get thrown off by the word privilege, and it's really, we're talking about advantages, and they're advantages, as you said, that are signed by others. So they're not advantages that we necessarily go out and grab for. As you know, I spent 50 years moving in the world, mostly relating to the world as a female person, and definitely being related to by the world as a female person. And when I moved into recognizably male, the facial hair and the voice change, I was given advantages and privileges that I did not ask for. I didn't do this for those things. But as you noted, people listen to,
Absolutely.
people tend to pay attention more, people make way for you, there's all these things that happen. And whether or not we are asking for those advantages, they can be assigned to us. Right. So
just like being white, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of things I have access to. Oh, yeah. We both know we have a big advantage there. So, we didn't choose to be white, but it is what it is. So we just have to recognize it.
If we don't recognize it, we're being very disingenuous about how things work.
Exactly. So I want to talk about marginalized groups and how intersectionality can mean that even though you belong to the same group, like all transgender people, we're all, we fall under the transgender umbrella, but there are subsections of this group who are more marginalized than others. And that's true for every group.
Well, I think if we cut away from trans for a moment and just look at queer, let's look at lesbians and gay men, queer folks, bisexual. If we look at a group of them and we look at the folks who are white, we've talked about white privilege, and we look at the folks who are people of color, even though, let's say it's a whole room or a club full of gay men, and maybe in that club things are fairly egalitarian, perhaps, but out in the world we have to recognize that those gay men who are white are going to have less or have more support in the world than the gay men who are of color, and so those are subsections within that population within under the trans umbrella that is immeasurably large, really, to fit us all under it. It's a very large umbrella. Oh, yes. We've got so many. I mean, we have identities, I think, that are still being discovered and named and claimed. You have trans masculine folks who there's some people identify as trans men, some people identify as non-binary. I do. Some folks maybe it's more androgynous. There's a lot of different names for that. Same with folks more on the feminine side of being trans, and then there's folks who are really don't identify with either of those. And every community has, and then within that we've got the intersections of people of color, or maybe depending on their national origin, their economic status, their various physical and mental abilities. I mean, all of those things we could say create some subsections that have maybe more or less privilege and power and advantage in the world, and need different kinds of support. And I think that's kind of where where some of this controversy about Heartspark Press has come from. It's why is this one community getting the support and this other community is not in this one instance? Would you agree that that's some of it?
Absolutely, that is the crux of it, for sure. Mm-hmm. When you're uplifting marginalized voices, it's totally okay to have smaller, safe spaces for those of us in a marginalized group who are the most marginalized. Mm-hmm. For example, people with disabilities. There's a festival that I like to go to in Montreal called Queer Between the Covers. It's a nice little book, zine fair that's really interesting. You should check it out.
That sounds really cool.
Link in the doobly-doo. But, when you go there, especially as a vendor, as I tend to, they really put the emphasis on accessibility, and they make absolutely sure that if you have certain mobility needs, you will get a priority space where you can, for example, get behind the table with a walker, which I need to do and have done, and was very grateful for. And it's not because necessarily I want to take space away or I need more promotion or whatever. It's because I literally can't get behind the table if it's not there.
Right. Right.
And this is very similar to this. So let's talk about how maybe trans feminine people and trans masculine people have different experiences.
Well, I really only know about mine, and I know about what I've heard from my friends who are trans feminine. There are similarities. We definitely there are ways that our experiences overlap, in that we spent some amount of time of our lives dealing with gender, right? Dealing with gender questions in ways that lots of folks don't, and that sets us apart right away, right? And the fact that we've actually questioned it and thought about it and had to have conversations and therapy and whatever else we've done to look at our gender, and then to decide that we're going to potentially take these steps to engage the medical community. I mean, those are some of the similarities. I pointed out before, when I transitioned, and I transitioned fairly late in life, so I had a long time to spend dealing with misogyny from the receiving end. When I transitioned, my experience was to be gifted all these plus points. I mean, so I was thinking about it. There was another way of explaining privilege, and it was like a video game where you had all the cheat codes handed to you, right? Without having to enter them, you just got them right away. And it's a great way to think about it. You just walk through life with this, cheat codes enabled, and so my experience is of crossing, I guess, the gender line, if we're going to look at it that way, was to suddenly have these really interesting privileges that I guess I knew that something like that was coming. I knew that would be some of my experience, because I was paying attention to things I read and people I talked to, but to actually have it happen was another story. And still, I still don't see the world entirely the way a guy raised as a guy would, with a boy head and everything. And I think that's also similar to, a trans woman, like the trans women that I know, the trans female people. We could say trans feminine, and even or non-binary feminine people. Mm. I think there's similarities, right? And then we have, but the folks that I've talked to who are, coercively assigned male at birth, there's a difference in the way that masculinity and femininity is dealt with in our society, in our culture.
Definitely.
And that is that as a young person and someone that was a tomboy, me leading into masculinity was much more rewarded and accepted and allowed for and given space for.
Absolutely.
Than anyone who was seen as a young boy or a teenage boy leaning into femininity.
Absolutely.
And I watched. So even though I could have, if I'm next to, if two of us are in the same space as young people, and there's a guy leaning into his femininity and I'm leaning into my masculinity, space is made. I can be on the sports teams and my aggression is appreciated there, but his femininity is not.
No.
That so already there's a difference in how our gender, I don't want to say rebellion, but the way that
exploration.
we're going against gender norms.
Yeah.
Mine is going to be rewarded and theirs is not. And so if you have somebody who's growing up in that environment of, their innate, femininity is counter to what everyone is trying to encourage in them, to the point of violence, to the point of, abuse, to the point of all these things.
Absolutely.
And not to say that assigned female at birth people haven't dealt with abuse too. I just think there's an extra, again, it's that extra twist, because to a patriarchy, anything feminine is punished.
Yes.
And anyone seen as masculine. And they invent things and decide that.
And it's the fact that it's directed abuse. It's not. I'm not going to say just child abuse, because child abuse is always horrifying. Absolutely. But it is because of these feminine traits
Yep.
that the abuse is often more severe, or present where it otherwise would not have been. I have multiple trans feminine friends who have suffered rejection and abuse extremely early in their lives for just displaying slightly more feminine behavior or effeminate traits. I
Hmm.
have I have friends who suffer permanent physical damage to this day from the abuse they've endured because they were feminine as
Right, because
as
someone was trying to
children.
make a man out of them, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Right, right.
Because
And
violence is always the answer in masculinity.
yeah, so even though there are a lot of overlaps of our experience, so the experience that you and I probably grew up with, relatively similar, and there's some of that that's similar with someone, like Amy and the other, the trans femme people that we know. Um, that twist, that difference in how femininity is dealt with in boys and men, um,
Absolutely. And then
and then see that, yeah,
post
yeah.
transition, it's also like a world of difference. So I transitioned, and my wife transitioned, and our experiences in the same environments were starkly different.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting experience that the two of you have of being able to witness both, these two sides and see how they're handled. That's really
Absolutely. And like for example, when she transitioned, so my wife has been she transitioned 4 years ago. She has been the victim of, I think, four assaults now. Rather serious physical assaults in broad daylight in public. I have never been assaulted for being perceived male. Ever.
neither have I. And I transitioned, you know, 4.5 years ago.
Yeah.
You know,
So, it's already there because I was looking up statistics earlier. I was looking at the Human Rights
yeah,
Campaign keeps a sort of not very precise list of
yeah,
transgender people who've died each year. And I was just looking
hmm
at 2017. I think something like 22 people died, and only one of them was a masculine, trans masculine person.
hmm yep,
2018, same thing, 29 people,
mhm,
and two of them, 20.
yep,
It's always the
yeah,
statistics show also that, and this has also been my experience, transgender women, when they transition alone, are at far greater risk of losing things like housing and employment and their children.
yep,
Also, when I transitioned, everything was great at my job. Well, everything was great. Obviously, there's a few hiccups, all the time when people transition, but I got misgendered a few times,
hmm
which eventually stopped when I grew like sideburns and my voice dropped 3 octaves.
same here.
But like my wife was harassed for a year and eventually lost her job for transitioning. A job that she loved and was really great at, that she had won distinctions for. All of a sudden, when she was a woman, she wasn't good enough anymore.
She's no longer as good at her job, apparently.
Yep.
I know. It's this is this is where we're seeing male privilege being accorded to us, you know, eventually.
And it's also
Yeah.
about perceived acceptability.
Mhm.
It's easier for a company to present someone who's gender ambiguous, possibly male, but dressing male.
Mhm.
Whereas someone who's more ambiguous might be perceived as male, might have a 5 o'clock shadow, but is dressed typically feminine.
Right.
And there's a huge prejudice there. When you're perceived as a woman wearing men's clothes, nothing happens to you.
Yep. That's why I'm thinking back, to being a tomboy, being butch, as at various points in my life, and for the most part, not punished, not any disadvantage I received was mostly just because I was seen as female, you know,
Right.
and so, and again, going back to sort of the patriarchy and punishing femininity in men, the idea that you would reject masculine power, you know, must just be a horrible affront
Yes.
to those who gatekeep the patriarchy. You know,
Male is desirable
we know
because
it's
it
not
is
about the
superior.
power.
Oh no.
It's not about the power. Not for us. Yeah. And I think something that a lot of folks don't realize about hormones, right, is that so I was 50 and I was butch, I mean, I was masculine leaning anyway, but the changes that testosterone brings about versus the kind of changes that estrogen can bring about. So,
Absolutely.
After puberty, when our bone sizes are set, when our skeletons are set, and a lot of other things are not changing for us. We can, at any point, we can add testosterone and become masculinized. Our voices drop, facial hair, body hair, our face shape changes, all these things. Yeah. Whereas estrogen is a much gentler hormone. It doesn't change. It can't change skeletal size. It can't change. It doesn't change voices the way that testosterone does. The feminization that happens happens, but it's not as it's not as big a change, and so.
No, and it's radical. My wife transitioned 5 years ago. Sorry to cut you off. She still sometimes gets called sir.
Yeah.
2 months after T, nobody was misgendering me anymore.
Yep. I mean, it's not. I mean, the one versus the other. Testosterone is a huge change agent, and estrogen isn't. And so that's a big advantage for those of us who are going FTM or anywhere in that direction. Is that, even taking it for a year or a few months, we can have lasting changes that will change the way people perceive us, even if we stop taking it after that.
Yep, exactly.
And estrogen doesn't do that, and especially if you've gone through puberty and you've gone into adulthood, it's really tough to demasculinize our faces, our voices, our bodies.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, and they continue to be punished. We don't look like we're breaking gender norms anymore.
No, we don't.
Right? You and I mean, I walked into my new job, and the only people that knew that I was trans were the HR folks, and I think I talked to the hiring manager. But everyone else took it at face value. I was a dude,
Yeah.
So all of this is to say that I think all of this is about trans feminine folks, people who are coercively assigned male at birth, deserve and should be supported in having spaces that are safe for them. Just as, I know there are groups for trans men, there are groups for all sorts of other identity groups, and it's good. It's necessary.
Absolutely. For example, transgender women of color are so vastly more marginalized than anybody else in the transgender umbrella. And they deserve to have their own safe space. Trans feminine folk deserve to have their own safe space.
Yeah.
And as masculine folk, to sort of come in and demand space in feminine people's spaces, it's it's not okay when cis guys do it to cis women, and it's not okay when trans guys do it to trans women.
No, and I looked at the whole thing when I started seeing, Amy messaged me at various times and will say, "Oh my God, it's happening again," and seeing some of the posts and seeing some of the things that were being said, and I just thought, what if? So there were a couple different places. There was the "you're not including us in your book," and that makes us angry and sad. And then there was, "you say it's for all trans kids, but it's really only about these kinds of kids." And it's so pulling those two apart, there's the "we want to be included in your thing," and you and I are agreeing that it's okay to have a space,
absolutely,
for and by a particular group of people, and all the rest of us, it's okay for us to support that and agree that it's a good thing. And if I want to have a space, if I want to have an anthology where I gather together all of my, coercively assigned, female at birth folks and say, hey, let's put together, a book for children, and let's really focus on, experiences we've had and that people like us have had. I think that's wonderful too, and I think that they would support us. I mean, I know Heartspark would. I think the other thing that really grated on me was this idea that Heartspark puts out this idea and collects these stories mostly about folks who are, assigned male at birth and are relate to the world as trans feminine, and some as non-binary, and to say that is for all trans kids, and I said earlier I think it's for all kids.
Definitely. I backed the Kickstarter because I was looking forward to buying a copy for my kids who are cisgender male.
Yeah. Well, I have two. I have one trans kid, and I have one who so far is not. And Flamingo Rampant, who puts out these great books about kids stories about transness.
Yes.
I read them to both of them, and they both love those stories. I think that argument that it can't be about these other kids because it centers this particular group is the same as saying that, okay, so if a group of queers of color got together with their artist friends and put together a book that's centered on QT stories for kids and youth, is that only for them? Is that so could they only be allowed to say that these are stories for queer or trans people of color, or could we agree that those are stories that all kids could read and all adults could read? I think if you start saying, well, okay, so if a person of color puts together a story and writes about a person, characters who are people of color, then that's only for them. No one would say that? That's stupid.
Well, people do, and they're racist.
I'm going to throw shade on you if you do.
Yeah.
So to say that about this anthology put together by Heartspark is the same sort of what? You want to see something happen, go make it happen. There are presses, and there have been publishing opportunities that have been put together that favor transmasculine folks for a long time.
Absolutely. And in fact, if you look at the media's attention for, all these transgender memoirs and coming out, transmasculine folk tend to be at the forefront and center, especially those of us who are white and thin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's we're out there, and there's space, and more space. Do I think that there should be more space made? Heck yeah,
absolutely.
I think there should be an anthology put together by folks from other perspectives, and tell stories for kids, because I think kids need to read stories from all of these different groups.
That's how you learn empathy.
Increases. Exactly. Are white kids only supposed to read books about white kids? That's happened forever and ever. We could see how well that's been. what kind of world that's made. Let's destroy that idea. Let's throw that out. It makes me sad when I see the and it's not really even critique, because it's not really well formed. It's criticism and hate and negativity that's being thrown at this group of women who I know are scrapping to put this thing together, who are, working themselves, endless hours, having to deal with all of the oppression that we were talking about before. They're scrambling to keep roofs over their heads. They're scrambling to feed themselves. They're scrambling for health care. They're doing all these things. Plus, they're making this amazing collection of stories and creative artwork for the world. I mean, we should be celebrating this.
Definitely.
We should be holding them up and saying, look at this group that is being dumped on from every angle, and they're making this amazing, beautiful thing happen. That's what I think.
Absolutely. And if, as more privileged people, we want to make spaces for ourselves, we have the platforms to do it.
So many platforms.
And as privileged people, as a white masculine presenting guy, I like to reach down and uplift other people. I don't just barge into their room and try to make it my home.
Yeah, because why would you?
Exactly.
That's just obscene.
And this is another thing. When I was putting together my notes for this, it occurred to me that, for God's sake, trans women have been at the forefront of every single right we have ever gained as a queer and trans community. And we keep throwing them under the bus.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like... It's just like the old idea of cannon fodder in infantry, right?
Yeah.
It's like, unfortunately, as a larger culture, we're saying, you go out there and risk yourselves. You go out there and risk your lives and your health, and we'll follow along when it's a little safer.
Exactly.
That's horrible.
And we tend to reap the benefits, not them.
Yeah, well, right. So then we turn around and we say, "Oh, this is great, and look at all these great things we have," and we'll just bolster, yeah. In so many ways. I mean, the larger, queer, LGBTQ, how many ever letters of the alphabet you want to pull in there, that movement for civil rights has really centered on, a narrower group than what who we really are, and it needs to change. It needs to start everywhere it can, and we need to start realizing and remembering that if we leave anybody behind, we're not actually making the progress that we think we're making.
And not just that, but when we tend to focus and center our most marginalized voices, we make the greatest advances every time.
We all move forward.
We all win. So I'm going to encourage you again to please go and check out this amazing Kickstarter. There are tons of rewards, and just the anthology itself is definitely worth it. I'm going to put a link again in the doobly-doo. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Cam.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. And go support your Kickstarter.
That's right. Signing off.